Hi, everybody. I'm Soledad O'Brien. I'm a documentarian. I'm a journalist. But mostly, I'm a very, very big fan of Patricia Cornwell. She has sold, as I'm sure many of you already know this, 115 million books. She's a 29-time best-selling New York Times author. Autopsy, her new book, I am predicting, will be number 30. Her work is available in 120 countries, 36 languages. So I got my copy early for this conversation, and a big thank you to Books A Million for getting us together to have this conversation. Autopsy is the 25th book in the Dr. K. Scarpetta series, which she started back in 1990. So, Patricia Cornwell, so nice to see you. I'm going to try my hardest not to fangirl out during this entire interview.
Well, that's mutual. I mean, I asked you, I said, gosh, I wonder if she would do a conversation with me because I'm a big fan of yours. And I will just say that I think you're a remarkable person in so many ways. And thank you for doing this today.
It is truly, truly my honor. Let's dive right in. And I should mention, we already said Books A Million got us together, but also this book is now out and you can check it out and get it at Books A Million and online. So let's begin with the why now. You've been away from Dr. K. Scarpetta for 5 years. Was there something that triggered you to bring her in again? How does that work?
It was COVID. My last Scarpetta book was 5 years ago. It was a very frustrating time because it was the election, and of course that was when Trump won, and it was just being on book tour during that was not a good experience, you might imagine. And then it was also, it was getting harder to figure out what do you do that's new when it's one book a year. And I've always tried to show people something cool and exciting in science and technology and criminalistics or whatever. And I just thought, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I think I should quit this before it quits me. That's what I felt like. That's an honest answer. And so I did. I quit. And I was so serious about it that I cleared out my library of old forensic books and those tomes that you always keep around because they will have something in them that you don't find on the internet. But I said, you don't need this kind of stuff. I mean, you don't need this anymore. And I turned my full attention to space, outer space, and all the technologies that go with it for the space thrillers, two of which I did two of those. Last one, Spin, came out in January. So here we are in the middle of the shutdown. I'm doing my first remote book tour completely from a place on the Cape. And you know what that's like. We're all doing it even as we speak. And everything was kind of frozen. I think nobody was sure where to go in life, including what are you going to do next? What do you do next? Is there a next? And I thought, I wonder what Scarpetta would be thinking right about now. What would she do with this world that we find ourselves in? And if I brought her back, could I do something that really captures everything that's been the best about it, but makes it still something new? And I started playing around with it. And the weird thing is, Autopsy, that this book was the COVID's gift to me because I wouldn't have done it. And I would be very sorry had I not done this book.
You say bring her back, and I'm going to have you give us the plot in kind of broad strokes in a minute. But an interesting part of the plot, right, is she also goes back to Virginia, which she had left. So before you get into the plot, tell me why you thought she should come back to Virginia. It plays a big role in how the story unfolds, of course.
Virginia has always been her emotional landscape. And, place is a character. And I learned the hard way long a time ago when I started moving her around a lot, thinking I'd show the readers really cool, new, and interesting places because, they must want to see these things too. But not really. They like the country store around the corner. They like the same old nosy neighbor that's been spying on her for years. We love those kinds of things, even though we might curse at them in real life. And I realized that Virginia is where it all started. It's my emotional landscape because I lived there when I was getting the whole series going and when it was also at its biggest, peak. And so I thought, let's put her back in that place that she knows. Well, that meant I had to go back. Now, I've not told anybody else this story before, but this was about 4 years ago when I did a couple of years ago, I did a tour of one of the medical examiner's offices in Virginia. I started going back originally because of Captain Chase, the space thriller, because she's in Virginia. So I had to go back to a couple of the old haunts. Well, I had been gone for a long, long time. And I had people who had never heard of me before. Imagine me walking through a police department in Virginia and none of these folks have ever heard of you. And I felt like a ghost. Um, and that was not fun. But you know what? If I had not felt that way, I couldn't have made her feel that way. And I realized that's how she's going to feel. She goes back, and people who either don't know who she is anymore or they don't want her around. Now, I'm not sure if that's true yet. I'll let you know.
Some of the same, again, before I let you get to the plot, but you're reminding me that there are, as far as like going back, there's also a lot of characters that we know and love. And you're right. I like them coming back into my life. I like hearing how they've changed or grown, or that some of their annoying habits are still annoying and they still do them. So tell us a little bit about some of the characters who we already know from past books.
Well, the readers will all know the usual crew, which is, Benton Wesley, who's Scarpetta's, psychological, profiler type, but he actually works for the Secret Service. He's, forensic psychologist. Her niece Lucy, who is a computer wizard, and in Autopsy, we see her now in the world of artificial intelligence. You see her right in the middle of the very things that are being done today, and she has a very special and poignant relationship with an avatar. And I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to spoil anything. But when Scarpetta walks in while Lucy's talking to this avatar, it's a very overwhelming scene, and the reader realizes what's going on in her life. Marino, of course, our big bad detective that is her investigative sidekick, and her sister Dorothy. So what I have done though in Autopsy, these people are all on top of each other. Scarpetta and Benton have this old rundown place in Old Town, Alexandria, Virginia. Lucy's living in the guest cottage on it. Marino is with Dorothy now, probably because he still couldn't get Scarpetta, so he had to go for her sister, I guess. We'll let the readers decide about that. But they're living in a condo on the Potomac River within walking distance of where the rest of them are. So it's the kind of small town. And by the way, Old Town is only like about 10,000 people in the historic area as part of the greater Alexandria. So if you go there, you have that feeling of a small town. And so it's cloistered, but it's scary. There's a serial killer. There's something weird going on, cases that haven't been connected. And then you've got this woman in Scarpetta's refrigerator downstairs. She's dealing with all kinds of stuff. Nobody knows her. She's only been on the job a couple months.
And it's a mess. And the job is a mess.
Her medical examiner system has been run into the ground in these years that she's been gone. She's got a hell on wheels of a secretary, somebody that's like something out of a bad scene in Dickens. This British, very nasty person, but she's a great foil. Anyway, she's worried about this woman in her cooler because she's afraid this could be connected to other things. Meanwhile, she's part of the Doomsday Commission.
What is the Doomsday Commission? I mean, I roughly know what it is. Why is that one of the things that she's doing? How do you use that device in the book?
The Doomsday Commission. I don't know if there is exactly something of that name, but there are things like that where you basically have a task force, but it's a top secret one, and it's going to be the best and the brightest in certain fields that help our leaders know not only what to guard against in terms of worst case scenarios out there, but if you know what may be a problem, what do we do about it? And if you have real friends, like I have people who are Secret Service or astronauts, NASA people, if you get to know people just as you do as a journalist, then you know the things that they have to worry about. And so the Doomsday Commission brings together people like a Benton Wesley, a Scarpetta, somebody from NASA, somebody from Space Force, from the Secret Service, cyber investigations, this kind of stuff to deal with the kinds of disasters that we have today. And our biggest enemy today, we love to deal with the serial killer because that's like a haunted house. And I'm always going to have that in there, so to speak. But it's the invisible enemy. It's like the coronavirus. You don't see that when you're walking out the door, that something's in the air that might want to take your life. Or the Havana syndrome, when you have, or high energy weapons that are used to destroy infrastructures, take out satellites, or cause brain damage in people. There are so many things that we can't see. Hacking. the cyber war. And so Scarpetta, as a medical examiner, she has to know how to deal with the worst case scenarios within the matrix of what can happen today. And that leads to what happens in Autopsy, where she's in the middle of all her own calamities when she gets called to the White House, because she goes in the situation room to find out that there's been a disaster in low Earth orbit, which is basically where the space station and other orbiting spacecraft are that are not that high above our planet, but they're in outer space. And something has happened with a private orbiting laboratory that nobody's supposed to know about. And it's the worst is feared because there's radio silence. Somebody's fled in a space plane, which or actually in a crew capsule, and basically Scarpetta is going to have to deal with death in space, and she'll do it remotely. So it will sound hokey, but this can happen in real life. You get astronauts from the space station. They're in a Dream Chaser space plane, which is a real thing. I've been in the simulator and everything. They fly it over to this orbit where this vehicle is that's not answering anybody, and they have to go inside it. And what they find in there, they have to be her hands, so to speak, because she can't be there to deal with this. But you got to figure out what happened to these people. And so this is really the first time that I know of that anyone's tried to realistically work with a death scene in space. And I did the same kind of research for it that I've done.
I was going to ask you about the research, because literally she's dealing with all kinds of stuff on the ground in Virginia, including a really hugely obnoxious assistant, while also like writ large is what's happening, up in space. How do you do that kind of research? How does it walk me through that?
Well, first of all, I talk to people that know what it's like to be up there. No matter what we may read about it or see on TV, you want to know, because if there's no gravity, first of all, imagine even trying to put on a Tyvek jumpsuit with everything floating everywhere. Imagine trying to change and put your PPE on. Imagine when a body is floating and moving around and you're trying to deal with it up there. And the big thing is fluids. Fluids, blood drips because gravity causes it to drip. Well, in microgravity, which is basically next to no gravity, which you would have up there, well, you are going to have a mess like you've never seen, because nothing works the same way up there that it does down here. So for her to try to figure out and reconstruct what happened, she has to do things rather differently. But of course, she'll get it figured out. And so, but I also went up in a zero-G plane where you might like to do that sometime. You strike me, unless you jump horses. Don't tell me you're
very low jump.
You're not fearless. You do that. That'd be nothing for you. But the plane does these parabolic trajectories of up and down and up and down. And when you're going up, you're down on the floor like this, on the metal floor with other scientists and astronauts who are doing this. And then when it's coming back down, you go into a free fall. So you're lying on the floor and you start floating up from it, and your pen floats and your notebook floats, and you can really get a sense of what it's like up there. And so I went through that experience. And then I have an astronaut friend, Jack Fisher, who has been up there, and he taught me a lot about what fluids do, like water. It's weird. If you were to dip your hand in a bag of water, the water will follow the sort of surface tension of your skin, and it starts creeping up you. Ooh. So literally, if you were sitting in water, it could start creeping up you and it go over your face like ectoplasm, and it's just stuff you wouldn't imagine if someone's not telling you. Now that I've not seen, because I've not been up there, but all of this is just good old physics. So what's Scarpetta going to do up there, and how's she going to figure out what happened to these people? And I'll save all that for those to read. But it's a fun scene. It's rather horrific.
I was going to say fun. It's like, listen, the name Autopsy there's a reason it's called Autopsy. Let's put it that way. It's interesting. You said the pandemic is what made you write this, and I think, all right, in the pandemic, I drank a lot, many, many cocktails. I gained 10 pounds just eating a lot of food.
I did both of those things too, just so you know.
Most of us did not sit down and knock out a book. What was it about seriously about the pandemic. I mean, I had a lot of friends who felt very isolated. I had some people who loved being kind of like away and working from home and found like there was a lot of good headspace. How was it for you? I mean, was it easier to write a book in that environment? Was it harder for you in some ways?
It was easier to write it because I really didn't, there wasn't much else I could do. I mean, you could really focus and be the hermit that I used to be in the early days when I did this. Back in the days when, way before your time, I mean, back in the Stone Age when there was no cell phone, there was no internet. And my rule to my staff back in my Richmond, Virginia days, when I'd go sequester myself to do a book, usually at Hilton Head, that was my favorite place to go hide on the ocean. And you were never to quote fax me before 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because once I heard the machine going, I'm distracted. So I kind of went back to living like that a little bit. But that was not the big reason why I decided to do this. With the pandemic came an absolute uncertainty about the future. Everything that I'd ever believed would keep going on for me in my profession, I was filled with doubt. I mean, places that you used to be able to do research, I couldn't go anywhere. Even now, there's a lot of places you can't go very easily. I didn't really need to. Thankfully, I'd already done a lot of that. But it was also like, okay, your choices are limited. If you're going to do anything at all, again, because I'm not even sure what anybody wants right now in this world that we live in, but what would you do? And I thought, well, Scarpetta's always the one who makes some sort of order out of chaos and randomness and horror. And I think I'd like to walk around with her for a while and say, hey, let's figure this out and see if we can make something good out of it.
So when you started this series back in 1990, did you know, like, wow, this could be a really, just have a ton of longevity? Is it one of those things where you say, listen, I'm delivering a book and I'm going to do that one book, and if the character resonates, fantastic. Like, how does it work? Or do you see little snippets of things happen and say, oh, this would be good for Scarpetta, that would be good for Scarpetta, oh, this belongs in a different book altogether?
I wish I could tell you that I had, more of an engineered plan for things, but the truth be told, it was as simple as being a journalist. I was the crime reporter, and then I did the Ruth Graham biography, and I thought, what about doing books about crime? But I'd never even read much of a murder mystery or anything like that. And so I started trying to figure out how to write crime books while having the journalist approach to it, which I've always had. That's what I really am. I'm just a reporter who writes fiction. Well, there are others, but I at least admit it. And so, but when I wrote three full-length crime novels, went to work in the morgue to learn, wrote three novels, nobody wanted them. Then I wrote Postmortem, 1988, 89. It was rejected by everybody, and that was four in a row, and I've been in the morgue almost 6 years now. And I really thought I'd ruined my life. And then Scribner's took it on barely. So while that was going on, I meanwhile started another one. But I never thought any reason to think this was going to amount to anything. The Postmortem, I got $6,000 for it. It was 6,000 first printing with no advertising or marketing budget. And I took $1,200 of my advance and had posters made and taped them up around the stores in Richmond in the middle of the winter, hoping somebody would care about this book. And so it was a rocky, slow start. And then all of a sudden, within 2 years, it went bonkers. And I never would have imagined that. I'm still in a state of shock over it, really. And I also look back, and to be honest with you, I sure as heck was not equipped to handle how quickly things happened when they did. It was from a little girl from a little town, so to speak. And then and suddenly being a millionaire too, on top of it, that it was wonderful and kind of awful, to be honest.
Yeah, change can be hard. I mean, even like amazingly great change, lots has been written about how challenging that can really be. So is there something that triggers you as you walk down the street? I mean, I'm just dying to know, I literally am fangirling, so I'm just going to ask everything I like to know. But I'm always curious if you think like, oh, this would be interesting for Scarpetta, or, oh, I should write another book about something else. I mean, is that how your brain characterizes it? Is it
things.
because it does feel like the stories are engineered to a bit. I mean, I know you say they're not, but there is a
Well,
real
they're
feeling of it.
engineered, but what I mean is I don't know. Like when I was writing Autopsy, I didn't already know what would be after that and after that. Unlike when I was doing the early books, if you had told me when I was writing Body of Evidence that today I would be talking about the 25th in that series or the 40th book that I'd written or whatever, because it's not the only stuff I've done.
Right.
First of all, I would have run for the hills just the thought of that, to write anything that much. I'm glad I didn't know. I'm glad I didn't know. I think I'd have been scared to death. It's really better not to know these things sometimes. I think just take it, deal with it as it's coming. And but no, I didn't know.
So the series now has been adapted for TV, which, by the way, about time. And also, I'm volunteering to come be a PA. I'm really good at coffee fetching and printing out scripts, if that's a thing that's done, because that's what we used to do back in the early '90s. But that might not be a thing anymore. Jamie Lee Curtis is she going to start? Tell me what you know about it. Have they already started shooting it?
No, no, we're in the very early stages right now, and Jamie Lee Curtis is her production company and is has a first look deal with Blumhouse, and so it's Jamie Lee Curtis and Blumhouse, and they have the rights to Scarpetta now, and we're in the very early stages of building the show, of starting with the most fundamental elements of like who's going to run the show, who's going to write, and this kind of thing. So it's one thing you talk about an engineer. Now Jamie Lee Curtis is an engineer. People probably don't know that about her, but she is supremely logical and she thinks through absolutely everything. So whatever is done here will be very thoughtfully orchestrated. But I'm very hopeful that at the end of the day, we're going to have a really fun. Well, I know you say I use the word fun a little too loosely when I'm talking about all this, but that we're going to have a really
It's called
cool.
Autopsy.
Yeah. Well, but people can stay tuned, and I'll keep everybody informed as we get deeper into it.
Who would you want? I mean, and I know, like, just off the top of your head, not that this necessarily would happen, but who in your mind would you see as playing Dr. K. Scarpetta?
I think there's probably a lot of really good actresses today who could do that. And the nice thing about it is it's a really interesting age range because depending on what age you want to start her, you could have a lot more latitude and hopefully not feel like you have to have somebody way, way too young to make it too realistic, and maybe give older women more of a chance so that because it's ridiculous that some of the attitudes, I think. But so I don't have anybody in particular, but in my in a pipe dream, what you want is like a Meryl Streep type person, somebody that's strong and fearless, but they're where their empathy in a very deep way. It's not on their sleeve. It's you. It's like we say in helicopter flying, and I bet this is true in riding horses. You feel it, you think it. You don't pull on stuff. You don't force it, and that you want that kind of touch with whoever would guide this character because she'll buck you off if you don't ride her the right way, so to speak.
Books a Million asked their readers if they wanted to submit any questions to you. And so I am now forced to ask other people's questions. No, I'm kidding. These are really great questions, actually. How this one in particular, you're kind of leading into it, and it's a fantastic question. How has the landscape changed for female leads since the 1990s?
The landscape has changed quite a lot, and in some ways, there are elements of it that are the same. But the way it's changed the most is that there were very few women when I was getting started. The medical examiner, Dr. Marcela Fierro, that I was so lucky to meet in 1984, she was one of very few women forensic pathologists in the whole country. And had I not met her, I'm not sure it would have occurred to me back then to have a female medical examiner. I thought, wow, now that's kind of cool. And I was a female firearms examiner and a female blood serologist. There were a few women, but not many. Today, there are more women going into all this than there are men, but it's still a very difficult profession. It's when you're dealing with the world of law enforcement and crime and violence, no matter how many more women there may be, I still think it's difficult, and you do run into attitudes sometimes, but that's true everywhere. The one I ran into the most is a woman shouldn't be in a place like this. I had a man, a bookseller, in 1990 take postmortem, and he told me, he said he went through and changed every pronoun to he to see if the book would not disturb him as much, and he said it just didn't work. And I thought, well, no, and why wouldn't she be in the morgue? I mean, why wouldn't women be down there? So many of the victims are women. um, but but I think that there's a lot more opportunity for women in science today, and I encourage it because um, that's, I mean, women are they can be so good. We can be so good at everything. Let's do it.
Yeah, it sounds like society has changed a lot in those 30 years. And that means, the characters can change too because they're getting more opportunities to do so many of those things. Next question was about burnout. Do you ever, I mean, you kind of described it at the beginning, feeling a little burned out. Do you ever get burnout is the question. And so then what do you do to get past that?
I think that anybody that says they don't get burnout, I'm sorry, I don't think they're telling the truth. I don't care who you are or what you do. If you are relentless at it in particular, and you really try to give it your all, there's going to be moments when nothing seems to speak to you, doesn't talk back, and you just get flat. And when I feel that way, and that can happen more than once in a given day, I have ways of what you might say changing the channel. I'll go listen to music and exercise for a few minutes. Go do something else. Go for a walk. I don't know. Anybody, whatever you can think of. And in terms of if you really hit what I would call an artistic block, I have two rules for that. One, go back to where it was still working, and two, open your mind up to something different. Maybe there's something that your brain is catching on, and you need to figure out what it is. But don't keep going ahead. Sometimes just going out and doing something. Go for a hike and look at an old ruined building somewhere. Go ride your horse past an old fallen down barn or chimney standing in the middle of a field and wonder what the story is there. The child in you needs to have some attention paid to it. That's what the problem is.
Do you see, doing now that you're back with Scarpetta, to doing another 10 years of books with Scarpetta, do you see it sort of branching off like a whole Lucy series? I mean, we won't give away any of the details about the Avatar, but, like, does that take you in a whole new direction?
I would feel that would be a really great privilege if I do 10 more years of these, if I feel the way I do right now. If I feel like there's a huge, just like a rocket's worth of fuel for it, which I do, because going away for 5 years and immersing myself in space technology stuff, literally almost going into space as much as one can, in my situation, it gave me a whole new palette of colors and ideas, and that's the most important thing that I need. So, but we'll see. I'd like to keep doing it. In terms of exploring something like Lucy, I think the television show will be maybe a fun way to really focus on those characters, and I hope as much as possible to be involved in that part of it too.
Yeah, Marino too. I was like trying to run through my head, like, who's going to play Marino? That's going to
Who
be.
do you think should play Marino?
I don't know. I'm so bad at that. I always pick Halle Berry for everything.
Well, I can see why.
But she should not be playing Marino, but still, right? Like, she'd be amazing. Oh, hang on a second. I have a great question. It has asterisks because it's such a good question, but I can't read my writing because it's so messy. This is
a sign of that's a sign of great intelligence.
Is that correct? I might just say it's a sign of bad handwriting, but I prefer to think it's a sign of great intelligence.
It is.
The question is, now that I can read it, so what do you do when you're not writing?
I think about that I need to be writing usually. I mean, I am, I don't
tightly wound. I love
much. It. I don't, I mean, I love to walk. I exercise. I listen to, music. I'm trying to think what else. I keep busy on social media. That's a big part of my life every day now, as we all have, we do this.
Yeah.
But really so much of my research, I go out and do things. Even if I don't use it right away, I'm going to go do something with the Secret Service in a few weeks. I'll go back to Washington. So I like to go out I like to go fly the helicopter. I almost left out my favorite hobby. That's my riding a horse. I've always called it the flying horse, except my horse doesn't bite me, kick me, or throw me off usually.
And
And the
your
kind of
horse goes much higher than my horse.
and the kind of horse you ride usually does all of those things
Yes,
to me and more.
yes. But if you're fast, you can get out of the way. What's been your biggest accomplishment, would you say?
My biggest accomplishment is overcoming things I'm afraid of and constantly doing it. Helicopter flying being one of them, scuba diving being another one. Old days playing tennis tournaments, and I could remember being so frightened and anxious before I would go off to what my match was, and somehow trying to get my head. I would read Tim Galway's The Inner Game of Tennis to try to get into this meditative spirit so I could get over my jitters. And to me, so much in life is about how you deal with the things that frighten you. And so, whether it's the littlest thing or a big thing, when you can walk into something that scares you and conquer it, that you should celebrate.
Last question, because that is a really good tee up for kind of the story of Dr. Kay Scarpetta coming back to Virginia, where from the get-go, it feels scary and not necessarily welcoming and like it's going to be a rough go of it. When you look back 30 years at what you've been able to accomplish with this character, how do you see it?
I see it as bizarre because I can't tell you where she comes from. But she's very, but it's like I channel this energy from somewhere. And if she doesn't want to talk to me, she doesn't. Of course, all the characters are a little bit that way, but it is weird because people think, oh, you're just talking about yourself. But no, it's not me. Believe me, if you saw me in chemistry class, you know this isn't me. I can't do any of the stuff that she does. But she is real enough to me that I can make her real to you. And that's a real gift for a writer, which is why I hope I do have many more years left to write about her, because it's not often that a character and an author can be that simpatico, I think.
Sure hope so as well.
Thank you.
Cornwell, so great. The book is Autopsy. It is fantastic. A big thank you to all of you who've been joining us for this conversation. The pleasure and the honor is all of mine. I read the book at home by myself. There are parts that are a little scary. I will admit to that. Every time I hear a creak in my house, I get up and double check the doors were locked. Autopsy, I should mention, is now available online and at your local Books A Million. So I highly encourage everybody to pick it up. Patricia Cornwell, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Soledad. It's such an honor. Look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Absolutely. Write the next book and then we do it for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about anything you ever want to.